installment of the Pubs Press, and on today's episode we'll be talking about slave plantations. Before we actually take a tour on a slave plantation, I'd like to go over the origins of where they came from. Right. And right now I'll be discussing the origins of slave plantations with a colleague of mine. His name's Brian. Hello Brian, how are you doing today?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing good. So why don't you tell us a bit about Diego Velazquez?
Sure. Diego was a Spanish conquistador, and he came to the New World, and he brought African slaves with him. And when he came to the New World, he discovered sugar, tobacco, and used slave labor to grow a lot of these products. And he took these products and brought them back to Europe, and stuff that's not native to Europe, and such as sugar, rum, molasses, and tobacco. And he sold them and became rich. And a professor of history called Diego Velazquez the first drug dealer of Europe.
Thanks Brian for sharing a bit about Diego Velazquez.
Sure.
Right now we're going to be doing a make-believe tour of a slave plantation with the pretend-to-be owner, Brian. We'll be meeting you guys there in a bit. My name is Indentured from the Pubs Press.
I'm Brian, and this is my plantation.
So does anyone else stay here with you right now, or no?
It's just me and my family that live in the house.
What about your slaves and indentured servants?
They live on a separate house quarters on my 500 acres.
So what does the average slave house have?
The average slave owner house was 2 stories. Upstairs was 3 bedrooms, containing the master bedroom and the kids' room. And downstairs was the kitchen and the living area.
Oh, okay. Mind showing me any, like, the outside, backyard and such?
Sure.
Man, we've been walking for quite a while. How much longer?
We've still got about 30 to 45 minutes, so we still have to cover about 500 acres.
Man. Oh, and to those who don't know, who need a visual representation of how big 500 acres is, that's basically 333 football fields. So, what kind of crops do you grow here, by the way?
Well, it's typical that the 4 cash crops are tobacco, cotton, sugar, and rice, but I only grow 1.
So, which one do you grow?
I grow cotton.
Okay, would you like to show me?
Yeah, let me show you.
Alright. So, where are we at now?
This is my cotton plantation.
So how many slaves do you have maintaining it?
I have about 200 slaves.
Do you mind showing me where they sleep?
Not at all, it's over here.
Okay.
Let's go.
So where are we at now?
So this is the slaves' living quarters.
So do you provide food for them, or like provide them in any way, or?
I provide them a piece of land for them to grow their own food, and they take care of their own beddings. We provide their living quarters, and they take care of the rest.
Well, thank you, Brian, for having me.
Absolutely. Have a good one.
All right, thanks.
In the first clip with me and Brian, you hear me mention indentured servants. Let me take this opportunity to clarify the difference between an indentured servant and a slave. There are many similarities, but however, there are also distinct differences. An indentured servant signs a contract for a term of 4 to 7 years. During this term, they are forced to work in physically demanding jobs, just as slaves are. Also, during their term, they are treated as a second-rate citizen, just like a slave. After their term, they are given property, arms, and the ability to grow food, along with transportation between colonies, along with their freedom. Slaves, however, are forcibly captured and transported to the New World. They are forced to perform manual labor day in and day out, and were seen as second-rate citizens with little to no rights. They had no contract, and they worked until they died. Female slaves that gave birth to their offspring also inherited the condition of their mother. So if the mother was free, then the child was free. But if the slave had a child, then the child was also a slave.
We will now be discussing the areas in which slaves were taken. Primarily, slaves were taken from the southwestern areas of Africa that were non-Muslim. The northern areas of Africa were Muslim, and they were at war with Spain and Europe. So when the Spaniards and the Europeans would come to capture their slaves, they would travel by boat past the northern areas of Africa to the southwest, where the Africans were non-Muslim.
After a slave was captured in Africa, the journey from Africa to the New World was dangerous for them. Because after they were captured, they were placed in cargo holding areas that would be and would have to stay there the entire voyage on the way to the New World. Once in the cargo bay, slaves were shackled by the wrists and ankles and forced to lay on their backs. About 1 in 18 slaves died along the way, but this number isn't 100% accurate because at the time, slaves that died weren't accounted for because they didn't see them as something that could turn a profit, and only slaves that were alive were accounted for.
If the idea of slavery wasn't bad enough, there was a term that was given to slaves that tried to run away. This term is a mental illness, and runaway slaves were given the title or given the diagnosis of having drapetomania, which again means a mental illness of a slave that runs away.
Action. All right, so this concludes this episode of the Pubs Press. I'd like to say thank you to my actor, Brian, and my cameraman, Matt. All right, I'll be seeing you guys next episode. Goodbye.
Love it.